and we like to ski.
I like being busy.
So you were in good company.
I think we're all alert. We work for cities
Sounds
about
like-
television, then we need to be in the things that gross us out.
That's actually very true.
Like the schmutz on a couch.
Yeah, but it sounds like
Well,
you were able to take advantage of this
Well,
coincidence.
you know,
focusing more attention.
Or the germs will be in competition with other things. Okay.
To do other things.
George
and now I
Bush.
don't have the time to
The
do
first, huh?
it.
Okay, it's interesting, the presidents who get to
So
carry
Hello.
out some of the
Hi,
gestures.
Jim, you made it.
you
Hi,
and
Val.
are you married?
Hi there.
Take maybe some of the other seats. Let our guests, how we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. And as I said, we've got Sho here tonight. You say your last name because I will blow it.
Maruyama.
And he's going to talk for about 20 minutes and share some things on the Japanese internment camps. And then we'll open it up for questions periodically. But there's a couple parts of his story I think it's helpful just to get through. If you have questions, you're going to be able to just ask them. But if you just want to have a piece of paper that you can write stuff down on, they're available here. And with that, and it might get a little warm in here, so we'll open some doors as we need to. I would ask everybody just to give their names as we go around. Most folks are church members here, but we do have some guests, and we welcome you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Sue Browning. As I said, I'm one of the facilitators of the program.
I'm Todd Parola, and I'm sorry. What kind of introduction?
Just your, I think name's probably good.
Yeah, I'm Todd
Member or church person.
I'm Alex Roth. I'm a member of the congregation.
And I'm Mary Jane Bushnack, a member of the congregation here.
Gretchen Meehan, member.
Diane Dorius, a member who took the first Building the World class that was taught here.
So how many?
DeBeaufort, I'm a friend of Sho's.
Judy Oles, I'm a friend of Sho's.
Laurel Drohan, a friend of Sho's.
I'm Barbara Johnson from the church.
Becca Lovelace, a member of this congregation.
I'm Jim Strathman. I'm a friend of Sho's.
Okay.
Sarah Munson, a member of the congregation. Ann Schneider, member of the congregation.
Linda Lutz, member of the congregation. I'm Valerie Wilk, I'm a friend of Sho's.
Great. Well, I welcome everybody, and Sho, the floor is yours. We are videotaping this tonight with the opportunity to both share the tape with Sho's family and possibly show it with our youth group and some different groups. So,
If you can't hear me, raise your hand. I want to describe tonight about the beginnings of my imaginal experience. And it began with, and I want to show you this. This was the posted on telephone poles around, all around, I don't know where, because I was only 15 years old and I was limited to where I could go. And this is the exclusion thing. And you're welcome to come look at it after the meeting. You know? Posted along here are various pictures I pulled out of the book, the red book in the back there. Thank you. Citizen 13660. The number refers to the family was assigned, every family was assigned a number, and that was his number. So, and in the rear there, pinned up, are diagrams of what the various camps look like. This, for example, is the arrangement of the 5 of the camps. They arranged somewhat differently. These things here are the barracks where people lived, and inside were the men's and women's room and a washroom, laundry room. And for some of you who don't know that this was an order that was like not legal and not necessary, because the president already had, through his own initiative, he was from the Navy. President Roosevelt was from the Navy, and he sent a naval intelligence officer to cover California, Oregon, and Washington, and Ohio to determine how dangerous the Japanese were. And Munson, which is his name, came out as it certified a remarkable, even extraordinary degree of loyalty among this general suspect ethnic group. It says there was no Japanese problem because the likelihood of them being subversives was almost nil. And of course, there was no sabotage or anything like that. The actual report is on the table back there, and there are copies of a shortened version of the report also on the table back there. Those pictures are from that red book, and in the rear there are diagrams, just like this diagram here, that is also in the big long book. Yeah, thank you. Those pictures are all taken from there. Now, I was born and raised in Southern California, you know, and I spent my summers, mornings playing in the playground, which was a block away, and in the afternoon I went down to the beach, which was, you know, a mile away, and we surfed the whole afternoon, and then came home to eat, you know. So that's the way I spent my summers in Southern California, right? Now, when this was posted, right, soon after war was declared, my father had already been taken to a camp somewhere over in New Mexico, as did many of the adult male Japanese who the FBI and other people thought were dangerous. Well, my father was dangerous because he had established a Japanese language school, a Kendo class, and had published 2 haiku magazines. I think so he could have his haiku republished, but okay. he had that was only a number of kinds of things that he did, and when he passed away, I went to his funeral at the downtown Little Tokyo in Los Angeles Buddhist Church, and there were hundreds of people in the church. Just hundreds, and of course I didn't know anyone. So I asked my cousin, where did all these people come from? He said, your father helped them in one way or another. Your father helped them, and they're giving the thanks for what he did. But nothing subversive, mind you, other than having Japanese language school. Okay. My father had a middle class income. He ran bingo parlors, and he had a brand new Plymouth car in 1937, so he was middle class. Never mind. When my father was taken away, you know, this is a typical Japanese family, right? My mother cooked and cleaned and washed, right? And father did all the income, the taxes or whatever, you know, and anything that needed to be done. So when the father went away, the mother had all this responsibility, right? And I don't know if you people have more experience now in doing things as the women, but my mother had virtually none. She knew a lot about cooking, right? A lot, and so I ate well Japanese cooking. But when it came to, you know, getting packed up, buying foot lockers and things like that, and you know, getting somebody to keep our furniture, she had no clue as to what to do. Huh? So it was a mess, to say the least. In any case, we all had one bag that we could carry, and we charged off to the bus. Here was this big bus, and we stuffed our one bag into, each person had one bag, stuffed it into the bus, and they took us some 10 hours, you know, and we were, mind you, Southern California, sunny, warm, beaches, and we come into black night, you know, absolutely black, you know, nothing, you know. And so what happens with only the light was in the bus and the headlights, you know. And we look out the window, and what do we see? We see these people in huge, you know what peacoats are? The big black, peacoats, the big black coats that the Navy people wear. They wear these big black things, and goggles, you know, big goggles that cover their face. It was like you were in Star Wars, you know? A whole different scene you were coming to. And the reason for the coats is we're in the desert. It's cold at night. The reason for the goggles is the wind was blowing and the sun was blowing, and it was just very miserable with all that stuff. And that was my introduction to Manzanar. So we traveled off to the bus, got assigned to our room, you know. Our room was, this is a typical barrack, was 20 by 100 feet long, right? Cut up into 4 rooms, right? And we had to take our mattress, our straw mattress, where they gave us, and we traveled off to the room. Now this was our 20 by 20 room, my first room, right? My mother, my older brother by 2 years, and myself, 3, right? And the other family was a mother and 5 women. A teenager, roughly my age, into a 25-year-old and their mother. 4 sisters, 2, my brother and I and my mother, in this 20 by 20 room. Now, if you came into this room, especially the women, there were no shelves, no place to hang any clothes, no place to put any of your toiletries or any that kind of thing. Of course, I don't know what you would do with this in the desert with the wind blowing and all that, but that was the condition, and that stayed for like several months. And of course, you had all these bags to contend with, right? It was a mess. Plus, the kerosene stove to keep you warm. And in this night when it got cold. All right. One of the things that happened, not to me, but to other family members, was that they lost all of them. My father lost the lease to his bingo parlors. He didn't lose anything. The fishermen in San Pedro and Harbor lost their boats, their nets, their pier, lost everything, all right? They had no recourse. The people down there had only a few days to move out. The scavengers came by, and they bought the refrigerators and stoves for like $5, and what was the family to do? They had to sell, right? And the one very description of a woman is that she had these very prized dishes that she had saved lots of money to buy. And after a third or fourth or fifth woman came up and says, I'll buy it for $5. And this woman was looking, these were hundreds of dollars worth of dishes there, and that she had saved much money to buy, and she finally, just in her absolute frustration, took the old dishes and dropped them on the sidewalk. And that was the kind of frustration that occurred. When you're selling your fridge for $5 and stuff like that, it was just awful. But, now, how many of you have lived in sunny Southern California or gone and lived in Florida for a few months? Oh, good. Huh? How many of you lived in the desert? Not too many of you, huh? But you would know the difference between living in Florida, Southern California, and living in the desert, where it gets hot in the daytime, gets cold at night, and I do mean it gets cold at night. And in the desert, the wind blows, and the skin flies, all right? And that's what we live on, right? Soon after we got there, they issued us, everybody, peacoats. I don't know, the Navy must have had peacoats from World War I or something. So they issued us, and that's what we used to keep warm. And everybody looked kind of funny with their peacoats, their arms way out here. We're all short people, and the Navy people are not short. So, now, as you can see here, the arrangement of these these are arranged differently in each of the 10 evacuation centers. You had barracks lined up on one side, or one side, and you had bedroom, women's room, laundry room in the middle. And at one end, you had a mess hall. All right? At one corner, you had a mess hall. All right? So, 3 times a day, you went out, eat. All right? If you didn't eat, if you didn't want to go out, you didn't eat. That was the thing. So, and my mother was not all that strong, but she had to also go out, And you can imagine in a strong family, everybody comes to the table and eats at the same time, and you have some control over your family that way. This didn't occur in this kind of situation. A kid like me could go to 2 or 3 mess halls in one meal, if he ate fast enough. And eating with my mother, not a way, no way. She was my mother, and I had nothing to do with my mother at that time. And could you imagine the consternation of the poor parents? They had no control over their children. But back to our thing, right? If you're in a 20 by 20 room with 4 women and 2 teenage boys, what are you going to do for privacy, right? And one of the 2 pictures up here will show what you did was you got the blankets that they issued you, and you hung them up some way or other, so the poor girls would have someplace to change. And that was but then you had to sconce and move the thing so you could have room for a changing room for the women. The boys could change anywhere. Now, toilets. You imagine in Japan, as a contrary to the States, a toilet is a separate room. Right? The bath, where you have your hot tub, is a separate room. That's where you get clean. Right? Yeah. And here you have the men's room and the women's room, and you had, maybe 8 toilets here, 8 toilets here, back to back, so but no stalls, no curtains, no privacy, and these were Japanese. This was terrible, because in Japan, you treat the toilet is a separate thing, and we have, not only is it separate, if you go to a house, stranger's house, you even have separate sandals that you go into the toilet with. And you come out and you have, you change slippers so you can get out of the toilet. That was but here, you were lined up, 8 and 8, no curtains, no separation, and that's what the women had to contend with for the first 6 months or more, before they came back later on and built some stalls so that the women would have some privacy. But imagine though, when, as any cook would tell you, you had a mess hall, with new cooks, new equipment, new everything, and every so often, the dishes or the trays or whatever didn't get washed thoroughly, and you had diarrhea. And when you had diarrhea, it was just not one family, it was the whole block. You had diarrhea, and which usually happened at night. And what do you see? Yeah. I have a picture in some other book which shows, a line of people, 10, 20 people lining up to get in. Right? And whatever way they could get warm and stuff. And they had to wait. And you have diarrhea and you have to wait. Oh, terrible. Well, fortunately, after 6 or 8 months, or certainly by the end of the year, that didn't happen anymore. They learned how to clean up. The bath too. It shows in one of these pictures that eventually they got a hold of barrels and they used the barrels to soak. All right? And eventually, there's no tables in here, that was the first. And eventually, the men got, surplus wood and crates and stuff and made furniture, tables and stuff. And you were blessed if you had somebody who had connections and who had a saw and a hammer and that sort of thing. But for the first 6 months or so, it was terrible. The only place to sit down was a couch. A couch. But when you first came to the camp, there was things to get organized. They had to get the kitchen, the mess hall running and that sort of thing. But for the men, who, many of them, some of them, who just worked all their lives, they just worked, and that was the whole being, to work. What did they do? They sat and smoked. If they smoked, or sat and did nothing. And for a lot of them, at least a dozen in my camp, that killed them, literally. That killed them. Doing nothing was just something they couldn't do, and kill them. Fortunately for some others who had other activities, they got themselves activities like a go board or shogi board, these Japanese chess boards and things, and they were able to amuse themselves by playing games, and some went off the campsite and scrounged up, dug up trunks and brought them back. I saw one man who spent a month, more, maybe 2 months, sawing his trunk. I mean, the trunk was big, like, and he would take them. It took him several months to saw it up, and then polish it off. And once he finished, half a year later, whatever, it was just a gorgeous piece of wood, just an absolute gorgeous one that you would sit up on the wall and decorate that. But they were the lucky ones. School. For a 15-year-old, I left school in February, something like that. School didn't open until December, so I had all that time to kick around and do whatever I wanted to do. And finally they got some baseball and bats and mitts, and so we can go out and what's called a fire break. In between each of these barracks was a fire break, right? So there's wide open spaces between the fire break. Like 100 feet, and you could have a ball field and play ball. But that was great for people like me. But in December or so, they finally got enough teachers, and the classroom were built on the south corner, one corner of the thing, and we started to go to, and I got enough tables and chairs, and we went to school. And I guess half the teachers were from what we call Caucasians there, as opposed to the local, the Niseis that were there. Half of them were Caucasian, half were Niseis, and my English teacher was a blind person, right? Had a dog, walking dog, but one of the other teachers, I don't remember what she taught, but she was sure pretty. And the drama teacher was just a wonderful person. He put on several plays during the short time we were there with the high school students. It was wonderful. Now, one trying time in camp was when they came to and asked all the adult males. Now, I can't remember quite exactly what the questions were, but one of them was, were you loyal to the are you loyal to the United States? Yes or no? Would you fight for the United States in the armed services? Yes or no? These are people that had been taken out from their homes in Southern California, put in camps, right? And had been there for 6 months or more. Wire fence, you know, towers with soldiers with their guns pointing down at you, and they come in to do the survey, right? And there was just a huge uproar in camp about this. And the common way to refer was no, no. You know, you were not loyal and you wouldn't serve, right? But if you answered no, no, you were in a category that wasn't going to be treated very nice. Right? But on the other hand, if you said yes, well, some people weren't going to treat you very well in camp, right? So it was a big problem. But in any case, what happened was, you didn't have to tell anybody how you answered the survey, but some person was referred to as a tattletale, or in the Japanese language, it was a dog, inu. He was a tattletale, and that was about the worst thing you could call the Japanese man. And they put him in prison for safekeeping because the people were bound to beat him up. And shortly after, there was a big movement to do something about it. And Manzanar sat on the slope, was Mount Whitney or something, a big tall mountain up, and it came down to the valley where there's a road in the valley. And there was then, at noon, the bells, the mess hall bells began to clang, and to announce this was the organization of this march to go down to the prison to object. And so if you were in my block, you could see the people gathering, marching down the fire break to the, and it was just an eerie feeling to watch all these people down. They weren't marching, they were just walking down there. Mom, can I go? No. Please, Mom, can I go? No. No. Being a very good Japanese boy, I didn't go. The people gathered by the thousands down there at the prison, and the day turned to night, and the crowd got antsy and argumentative, and they were pushing and shoving, and all of a sudden the soldier shot his gun, and he hit some 17-year-old boy. And that was the only person that ever got killed in that manner in my Manzanar. That happened. More people got killed in other camps, but that was the only one in my camp. And in my class, I wasn't there, because I would have been in the front row along with that other 17-year-old. My brother was not involved. He was 2 years older. He got out of camp very shortly after we got there somehow, and he got into the University of Utah, and he was matriculated there. Okay. The hospital. There was a hospital there too at each camp, and it was located in the far corner of camp. But fortunately, I couldn't tell you much about the hospital because I didn't go there and I didn't know anybody. But I imagine as is with the school, half of it was staffed by the local Japanese people who were doctors and dentists and nurses and the other half was recruited from outside the camp. You know? So, with that, I will open it to questions. One other thing. The back there you have to see a short piece like this, which describes an introduction to the Munson report, which is I mentioned before. It described the intelligence report, and the full intelligence report The full intelligence report is copied out of the congressional record, and that's also back there. All right? Yeah, that's it.
I would like to know, we're looking back on it as history, and we know it lasted a certain amount of time, and then it stopped, and what the opinions were after it was over. But I'm curious as to, when you were there and you were in the middle of it, what did you think was going to happen? What did people say? How did they think it was going to end?
Well, in terms of a 15-year-old, who could care? I was having a ball. In terms of my mother, she was just out of it. She depended on my father to do all the thinking, and she didn't do anything at all. But in terms of the others, the no was the one that triggered all the feelings, right? The men who signed no, they were taken off to a different camp. And 2,000 or something like that were subsequently shipped to Japan. And the other ones, and that was the kind of, is that the kind of thing you were talking?
I guess I'm just thinking, sometimes we forget when we look back on things that in the middle of them, people had no idea what was going to happen and might have had very scary thoughts about where this could go. We think, okay, well, so it was really shameful and terrible, and then it ended and everyone went back home. But at the time, what were people thinking? Were they afraid, they're going to send us all back to Japan, or they're going to kill us, or, it's such a bizarre experience to go under. I just wondered what people's fantasies were about what was happening.
They were living day to day.
So they weren't thinking about it very much. They were just surviving.
No.
Sho, one question I have for you is that I understand that you enlisted in the military at some point. Were you in the camp when you enlisted?
Oh yeah.
And could you describe how you felt about that? Because it seems, it's always mystified me how somebody could experience what you experienced and then feel good enough to enlist in the Army. I just can't imagine that.
Well, I didn't say during the summers or growing season, men could volunteer to go planting and harvesting, right? And I went for 2 weeks weeding corn and stuff. It was an absolute disaster because I'm not a farmer, I'm a city boy. Trying to put a straw hat and a hoe in my hand and weeding, I was an absolute disaster. But I got out. To answer your question directly, so I had a little experience outside. I did the other men that went on the work cruise. When I graduated in '44, the option to get out is you had to have some place to go and some place to do. And something. You had all these regulations. And so I joined the Army as a way of getting out of camp. Otherwise, I would have been there for God knows how. I wouldn't have known at that time how long I would be there. But I volunteered because if I volunteered for the Army, especially in this program, I would be able to go to college for a year. That's what they said. So that's why, to answer your question. I did it so I could get out. You have some other questions here.
I understand your father was in a different camp.
Mm-hmm.
How long was it before you were reunited? Your mother was reunited with your father, and
sometime after I left, they closed the other men camp, and my father joined my mother. I wasn't there any longer. And then when the camp closed in 44 or something like that, they moved to Pasadena.
I was wondering, what was it like when your family went back to California? Did you get any reparations for what had been taken from you in Southern California? Did you
Yeah.
have to start everything all anew?
In 1989, after years of I can't remember about, there was a hearing that the Congress had, and they went to a dozen different cities across the country to hear the experiences of people like my mother. Well, my mother didn't speak because she didn't speak enough English, but a lot of Niseis like myself attended those hearings and said, my gosh, you think, speaking of their parents, you went through all that, huh? And you never told us a thing about that? Most of the Niseis like me never do anything about it because the parents who were there never spoke of it when they got back to California. So it was the first time they'd heard of this in 1985 or something like that. And the conclusion of that, which was really pressed for by what we call senseis, the generation of my kids. The lawyers there were far more aggressive than the older Nisei group, and they were the ones that pressed for the hearing themselves and for what we call the reparations. And in 1989, Congress awarded us each $25,000 for each person that was in the camp.
How did your father get started again after they went back?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
How did your father get started in business again, or what did he do after he went back to California after they were released?
My father had work, like all the Japanese males. So when they got back to California, Pasadena, he worked. All the jobs that he could get, that he could work at, was being a domestic. Right? He cleaned houses. Right? He cleaned houses. And when I came home from college to visit for a while, I would come home and hear my father and his best friends. They've been best friends for most of their lives, you know. They would be at the table playing go. They wouldn't do much talking, but you would hear click. These stones would rap on the table, click, click. And I'm thinking, gee, my father is doing domestic. He was a middle class person before the war, but that's what he was doing. To be sure, he was also getting Social Security. His friend, who had not been in camp, he went to Reno and he opened up bingo parlors in Reno, and he made a pot of money in Reno, where my father would have if he kept his bingo parlor at the beach, because that was an R&O location for the Army people there. So he got landscaping with the lawnmower and that kind of thing. And my father says, I can't do that because that's too physical work for me. I'm too old for that. But he did that. But then he would come home, get his lawnmower out of his car, go in, take a bath, come back, put on the 6 shirts and silk clothes. Because he had money, right? And then he would come over to my father's house and play golf.
Sure. Oh, is there somebody else? I'm curious about I'm curious about your community prior to the internment, and whether you would characterize it as a sort of self-segregated Japanese community, or if you felt it was well integrated with the rest of white society, as you know, when you were growing up. Number one.
Well, my situation is vastly different from the majority of Japanese. The majority of Japanese lived in San Pedro, were the fishermen, and they had their own community, their own stores, and the other large group lived in downtown Los Angeles, or were associated with the downtown, and they also had their own stores and all that kind of businesses. But I lived in Santa Monica, and at my school, I was the only Oriental in the school. There were a few blacks, a few Latinos, and that was it. There was no integration. So the only Japanese I knew were from going to Japanese school. Other than that, I don't know. The biggest deal for the young man like me before the war was going to Kenjinkai, which is the state or province that my father came from, and the people of that would have a picnic. Several hundred of them would go to Griffith Park or some place and have a picnic.
And did you have a Buddhist orientation growing up, or what was your religious experience coming up? By the time you were 15, had you a religious orientation, from your parents or from the? I guess not particularly from the community.
Well, my father was much, what should I say, conformist. Right? So we went to the kids went to the Free Methodist Church every Sunday morning. Right? Every Sunday morning we went to the Free Methodist Church. That was the most regularly I've ever attended church. My father was not a Methodist, he was a Buddhist. A Buddhist doesn't require you to go to church every Sunday or every other day. And for somebody like me, on Sunday, was you went to the church that had the best preacher. Right? And in my camp, the Buddhist preacher was the best. His philosophy was, in the summertime, you told mystery stories. You're getting the fear. In the wintertime, you gave love stories to warm up the audience, And I don't know what the Christian church preachers did, because they were a bore as far as I was concerned.
So one last follow-up on that. You said earlier that your dad had arrived you said your dad had arrived in the States around the turn of century, 1900?
Yeah.
Am I correct? And was your mother also part of that wave? Was she also, I'm kind of curious about what her, what their respective experiences were, or whether her family came, later, after the fact, or perhaps her family had been in the country much longer. How long had your mom's family been in the States?
This is not a matter of family in most cases. My father came in 1900 with his older brother, and that's just the two of them in this country. They had a family of 10 siblings in Japan. My mother was an arranged marriage. My father came in 1923 or so, and she had 6 sisters in Japan. None of them ever came to this country. Does that answer your question?
Right, yeah, yeah.
I have a question if you don't mind. Looking back at those years when you were 15 and all the experiences that you went through, if you were to talk to, let's say, a group of 15-year-olds now, what kind of lessons did you take from that experience that you could tell them now? Because obviously the kids of today, especially here in this area, I mean, they really can't experience that intensity that you did. So what lessons would you give them or have you taken from them?
My goodness, that's a tough question. Well, the problem with answering that question has to do with being a Japanese, raised as a Japanese, even though I wasn't in a Japanese community, you know. But when you are in camp, you're in a Japanese community, and you behaved accordingly, right? And so, while I was 15, and I did all kinds of activities, like going to 3 mess halls when I was hungry, and that sort of thing, you know? And we played a lot of football and baseball and that kind of thing. But we had our fun, but it was all legitimate fun, you know. There was no hanky-panky about it at all. Does that answer your question at all? Because it hardly depends on your background and the community that you're living in. And in the Japanese community, it is a very strict kind of structure in the community.
If I could ask one follow-up question. So now just to you, after those years, you know, like when you were getting older, how were your feelings with regards to that time? Have they changed? Did you go through periods of anger? Did you go through periods of understanding? Did you go through different cycles in your life, looking back on that time?
I don't recall being angry well, for me, it was very different than most of the Japanese that were in Southern California. Most of them returned to Southern California, as you could, if you look at the statistics, most of the Japanese that were from Southern California moved back to Southern California, and that's where they lived. I, on the other hand, moved from camp to Salt Lake City to going to college, and then I moved to Philadelphia. I had nothing to do much with the Japanese community. I married a Caucasian in Philadelphia and had 4 boys. And I didn't feel any anger. I don't remember feeling any anger at the time, you know. And I don't remember my father expressing much, but I didn't. I didn't. We just lived with it for the most part, and I don't think there was a lot of anger, except for the no group. The no group who said they weren't loyal and they weren't going to the army. Well, they went to Shirley Lake with the rest of the thousands who also answered the question the same way. And they expressed their anger by that survey, and many of them went to Japan, even though they had never been there. Yes.
For me, the first time I met a Japanese family was when I was about 5 years old in 1947. And I went to visit my grandmother in Logan, Utah. And there was a Japanese family living in her basement. And just putting that information together with what you've just shared with me, I wonder if they had probably been in internment camps 1947, I think the father was going to Utah State University, and they had a little girl, and they, I've just never made that connection before. They're very friendly with my grandmother and my aunts and uncles, and I remember sneaking down into their apartment to just check them out because I'd never met them before. But did you know other Nisei who were in Utah?
My brother.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they were the Sakai family in Logan, and I don't remember the parents' name. Just the little girl's name was Patsy. So.
I can't ask my brother because he passed away.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, as you said on David's questions, that you don't remember an atmosphere of anger or anything else. Was there any thread of this is bizarre or what's going on in the adults that were around that had been effectively rounded up? I think Wikipedia today, I looked closely, it was 120,000 people that were in some of these camps. Were people trying to rationalize it, or?
In the book back there, you'll see descriptions of 3 or 4 of the Niseis, who were the old Niseis. They contested the evacuation, and they said it was illegal for the government to, which it was. And they went to court and went to prison because the court didn't side with them at that time. And the Supreme Court later on avoided the ruling at that time. So there were a few of them, but not very many. This was the initial before they were sent to camp.
I'm remembering a passage from Ronald Takaki's book, A Different Mirror. Are you familiar with it? I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. Do you know the book I'm referring to? He discusses the history of it, of the internment camps, and I can't remember actually if it's been a decade or more now, and I wish I could tell you a little bit more about him. But his book, The Different Mirrors, is about the Asian American experience and I believe he grew up in the West Coast. But as I understand this, vis-a-vis your question, Sue, about the sort of attitude about the Japanese, I believe that Takaki asserts that among there's a great irony because there's actually a particular Japanese American leader who was concerned about the way Americans would deal with the Japanese ethnics, and who actually helped to initiate the creation of the internment camps. And so this was a huge irony for me to read about in here, and it kind of begs the question of we don't like to make generalizations about groups of people, but is there a certain amount of docility among the Japanese community that you were aware of?
No, I wasn't. There was a hostility among what is called akibe. Akibe is a Japanese who was sent to Japan during some early years of his life and went to school in Japan and came back from Japan, where he was by then fluent with the language and the history and the culture of Japan, and came back. Some of those kibes were very violent against the evacuation, and express the violence against it in many ways. I don't know much about that though, because I didn't follow up.
Do you recall if your parents expressed strong feelings during or after the internment? Did they ever talk about it?
No.
Nothing.
That's a common approach to the immigration experience, whether it is one like the Japanese, in California experienced, or my mom's Chinese, and I think it can be said for other European ethnics who have come over here. There's a certain sense of in many cases fleeing horrors, and a sense that we need to put this behind us and create anew where we are, and therefore for many of us, there's much of our stories that remain kind of shrouded, because either there's an amount of shame or there's horror associated with it. And so maybe if we're lucky, as I am only now, I'm starting to learn about the things that happened with my grandparents. So I think the immigrant experience is always sometimes kind of shrouded, whether you're talking about Asian or even European.
I can certainly relate to what you're just talking about. My grandmother immigrated from Germany after World War I, and so she lived through the severe economic difficulties right after the First World War, and came over. She would never talk about that. It was, she came over here, she was starting a new life, didn't want to talk about anything. And to this day, she's dead now, but she never talked about it. Not, she might have talked to her brother about it, who also lived through that.
Any observations on that?
I didn't hear a question.
Oh, she was saying because of the Buddhist thread through Japan, deep in the culture, that may have played culturally into some of the reaction, to the internment, and just
meaning the acceptance of what is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the kind of things that I don't know if the Jewish culture is the same, but when Hitler transported the Jews in the boxcar or whatever, there was no fighting to get out. They all walked in. So the story goes. It's the same with the Japanese. When they were ordered to assemble in the bus stops and go to camp, they all went.
I always, pictured those, that there were people that were, if you didn't do that, there were consequences that were ugly, is what I've always sort of pictured from watching movies. I don't know. It's interesting.
You said that you were the only student in your high school that was Asian, and I think it was in Santa Monica, and you had a few.
In my elementary school and junior high school.
Yeah.
I didn't go to high school enough to know.
Okay. And so, what was your experience there, being the only Asian there? How did you relate to the other students who had, different cultural experiences?
Oh, I was quite American, no problem about that. I could jitterbug with the best of them. But the problem was the social interaction. My best friend was a Jew, for the reason that we both went to Saturday language classes and culture classes, and neither one of us were ever invited to the social parties that were occurring in the junior high school. We were out group, just like the blacks were never invited for the same reason. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I wanted to see what you're...
But, no. there were very many poor people, that's true.
Joe, you said that your family was not part of a Japanese community. Do you think this was typical of people who were put in the camp?
So if I understand it, your family was not part of a Japanese community.
Oh, yes, it was.
Oh, okay.
But you didn't live in a Japanese community?
No.
But you were part of it, you were part of the Japanese community through the Japanese schools and the different pieces? I think Gretchen's asking, some people were more spread out, if I've got it right, Gretchen, some people were more spread out and some people were more in large Japanese communities. Did that affect who got brought into the internment camps?
No, everybody who got pulled into it didn't matter. If you lived on the California, Washington, and Oregon, you all got in camp. No exception. It didn't matter where you were living, like we were the only family in Oakland Park, that didn't matter, you know. But whether you lived in where there were 20,000 that Tokyo and Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, didn't matter. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then, did you remember much discussion among the adults as the camps were being established?
What were the adults talking about as the camps were being established? What was the conversation? You talked about the women and there were some men. What were people talking about?
Well, we were the only Japanese family in Ocean Park, right? And I didn't have any interchange with any Japanese family except at Japanese school, right? I don't know what other people did.
No, but as the camps were getting started, once people got to the camp, and you had the pea coats and everything else, what were people talking about when the camps were very first getting started in the camps?
The major conversation was how to adjust, how to get furniture, how to get hangers to hang up your clothes, how to get shelves put in so you could put a toilet, how to get tables so you can sit, and chairs so you can sit and write and read. This is the major kinds of things that we engaged in early on. I didn't engage in it. I was out doing all kinds of other things. But the adults were doing that because obviously you needed to have chairs and tables, having decent shelves and hangers and things like that to have any decent sort of family life. So that's what they were engaged in.
One more question.
Mary Jo had.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, was it typical that someone the age of your brother was taken out of the camp and sent to college?
I'm sorry?
Was it typical that the college-age kids in the camps were taken out of the camps and sent to college like your brother?
My brother wasn't taken out of camp.
He was what?
He wasn't taken out of camp. He volunteered to go out.
But volunteered to go to college or volunteered
to go to college.
Was that typical?
Huh?
Was that common that you could get out of the camp to go to college?
You could get out the camp if you had a place to go.
Oh.
You had to have a place to go. And
did he have to pay for the college or did they
it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
You're
It
talking
didn't matter what you
post-war.
had. You had to have a place to go and a job or a function or something, right?
That doesn't make any sense. That would
From our camp, the biggest receptors were in Chicago and the Quakers in Philadelphia. They handled housing and jobs and things like that so that the people could get out of camp. But if you didn't have contacts out of camp, you didn't go.
So I'm confused.
Huh?
I'm confused. You're saying if people had places to go
Outside of the West Coast.
Sorry?
Outside of the West Coast.
Outside of the West Coast. So even before the end of the war, if you were able to find a sponsor or something away from the coast, then you were deemed a non-threat and you could...
Yeah.
I see. Okay, interesting.
It's a few folks that haven't asked yet. There was somebody, hand over there, back up.
Once the war ended, were people able to leave the camp, or was there still control exercised as to when you could leave and under what circumstances?
Yes. They voluntarily left camp. Most of them returned to whatever community they left.
So there was no restriction?
When was that restriction lifted? Was it right after the war?
I think they stopped the camps in 1945.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I did a full Wikipedia read before this. And there were folks, as I understand it, but that didn't have any place to go, so they had to keep some of the camps open for another 6 months or a year because that was now their home and not everybody had a place to go. And I don't know if it was accurate, but it is Wikipedia. People were given $25 each.
That was all. No help in making contact.
That's my understanding. I think David had one more question. We're going to try to end by 9, and I'm at 8:56, so we're in good shape. And
Just
yeah, so
your
David,
experience as a Japanese American in the West Coast, I mean, can you compare that with your experience in the East Coast when you went to Philadelphia, you said, which is, has a big Italian population and Dutch population. Was there any difference culturally that you noticed as a Japanese in both different locations or not?
When I was in Ocean Park, I didn't have any close friends that were Japanese. All right? The only Japanese I knew were the Saturday Japanese language schools that and of course my dad's best friend was living several blocks away, and I had, contact with them, excepting they were all older than I was, so I didn't have much. And besides, they were girls, and at 14, I didn't have much to do with the girls. So there wasn't much shift when I moved out to go to Utah and work in Utah. I mean, there were Caucasians, and that was, that was my milieu in Ocean Park anyhow. So I didn't have any shift.
Thank you.
I got one last one, real quick. I think it's common to think of Asian society or Japanese society. Well, it's probably commonly thought of Asian society as pretty patriarchal, very subservient women, and so I'm curious if you're aware firsthand or not for the women who were brought to these camps separated from their husbands, if there's any kind of ironic phenomenon of this being a positive, or rather leveraging a kind of positive change. In other words, a woman might have been...
Was it a growth opportunity for them?
Sorry?
Was it a growth opportunity for them?
Well, as an opportunity, yeah. Are you aware of a story of such where suddenly, it's like, well, a woman goes through this horror. She was not terribly happy doing what she was doing for her
Was there any
for
upside?
husband.
Is that the short?
And so is there enough? Was there
was there
upside?
enough?
Yeah.
So, was there any
Maybe-
upside to the?
You're out of my area.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm a 14-year-old kid whose
Right.
only interest is food and playing.
Right. But I thought that you might have paid attention subsequently to the experiences, stories of
Okay.
it. Anyway, thank you.
Well, I think we're going to close, but in the spirit of the class that we're taking on building the world, I'd ask everybody to take a deep breath.
Take the money back. And
Did you
so
have
I
this?
can't remember exactly what the conflict was, but there was, I want to say it was the Japanese invasion. And they
Well?
came for like 4 or 5 years or something.
Let me see this. Hi, I'm Linda.